It's good to have you back for another day as we are continuing on our Bible study through the book of Nehemiah, which my contention has been that the book of Nehemiah has been wildly misunderstood and misinterpreted, especially by the U.S. American culture. Either way, whether you've been a part of this journey up until this point or you're just kind of joining us now, we would love to have you be a part for the entirety of this journey. And you can find out all of the details by going to that URL. It's right there on your screen, go.christtable.today/reconstruct. There, you're going to find all of the details about the reading plan, how you can be a part of this, and other helpful materials to be a part of this journey with us. Today, we find ourselves in Nehemiah chapter 5, verses 6 through 13. And as we get there, we're kind of jumping into the middle of a story that we began yesterday in day 10. So, it's glad to have you along. Let's dig in. Yesterday, we jumped into the deep end of a situation as this wall is being built around Jerusalem. Things have gotten difficult, and so the foreman, the supervisor, Nehemiah, who is also the governor of the area and the person who's pushing through this idea of constructing a wall, has said, we need to do this faster and we need to do this safer. So he's increased the number of working hours as well as doubled the duty by making sure that not only are people pulling their weight in construction, but also that now people are on guard shift duty as well. So this whole building of the wall was really something that has an incredible impact negatively on the community because it's taking them away from their other jobs. It's taking them away from their families. The resources and the cost of doing this are astronomical. And so, unfortunately, what's happened is the people have borne most of the weight of the cost and the trouble and the difficulty of this. And so the poor and the people who have the least amount of resources and the lowest margins are the ones typically who bear the brunt of situations like this. And that is exactly what happens. But worse, the wealthy in the community don't offer any help, don't offer any assistance, they don't offer any grace on loans, and in fact kind of come to this point of extorting their neighbors literally in order to line their own pockets, even to the point of people having to mortgage their properties, sell their properties, or even in some cases to pay the debts, essentially sell their kids, their children, into indentured servitude. And so this is a mess. And the Bible calls this kind of situation usury. Usury is interest that's paid on loans. And actually in the Old Testament, the law, God tells them you're not to charge interest on loans at all. And so it really creates a different lending situation than we might have here under capitalism in the United States. Usury, forbidden in the law of Moses because all Jews are a member of one family. And so a loan really kind of is that, a loan, no interest being paid on that loan, though if someone defaults and doesn't pay it back, then there was punishment for that. And that is exactly what was going on. And lenders and wealthy people were taking advantage of that. So when we come to today's story, this has now come to the forefront. People have gone to Nehemiah and complained. And Nehemiah now, we've been a little tough on Nehemiah through this journey. If you've been a part of the Bible study over the last 10 days, by the time we get now here to day 11, Nehemiah is, he's not really been shown in the best light. And here we have another situation where Nehemiah is going to have a chance to respond in a way that is helpful and godly, or whether he responds in a way that really just puts his needs and what he wants first. So why don't we just, with that intro, jump right into the text in verse 6. When I, meaning Nehemiah, heard their complaints, I was very angry. After thinking it over, I spoke out against these nobles and officials. And so he's not angry that this is a distraction. He's not angry that the poor people are complaining about how this wall is impacting and affecting them. Nehemiah actually, to his credit, hears what they have to say, sees the problem, and verse 6 says even gets angry over it. And he told them, you are hurting your own relatives. And there it is again. As we've said in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, the community is always used in the language of family. And so it's not as though it's an us and them. It's a we are all one and in this together. So you're hurting your own relatives, your own family. Whether that was literally true, it certainly is true figuratively and in the eyes of God and in the eyes of the leadership that he's put in place here by charging interest when they borrow money. Now, I love that idea of anger because oftentimes, especially in Christian circles, historically, anger has been seen as being something that is a no-go for followers of Jesus Christ. Don't be angry, because anger is a sin, is the way the teaching often goes. And so usually that's given to men. And it has, over the years, really created, I think, a barrier in a lot of ways between God and between individuals who are passionate individuals, and specifically, oftentimes, men who, through the nature of the testosterone in their bodies, tend to oftentimes be described as being angry. Now, I don't mean to say in any way, shape, or form that all anger is okay and acceptable. In fact, anger may well be one of the greatest vices that humanity has to deal with, and to maybe not repress or suppress, but control. And I think that that's really what it comes down to. Anger in and of itself is not evil, but the misuse, the misdirection, or the uncontrolled anger is I would say, ungodly. And so we see God being angry at times throughout Scripture. Job is one of those moments where God is angry. We see God present in Jesus Christ being angry, not once, but twice, in flipping the tables in the temple of the money changers who were extorting their brothers and sisters. And here we see anger. And one of the things that is, I think, clear is that anger is always an appropriate response to the harming of human beings. And this is where we see God's anger rise up and directed. And this is also, I think, where we see the ability for us to be angry and not sin. And so this is Nehemiah's situation here, is Nehemiah has seen how harm is coming to his brothers and sisters in the community, and his response is anger. Now, certainly part of that anger may have been because it was a distraction. Part of that anger might have been because obviously division in the community is not good for the unity that he needs to build the wall. But for whatever may be foundationally behind the anger, the truth is that Nehemiah seems to react correctly and appropriately to the problem at hand. Excuse me. So he calls a public meeting to deal with the problem, and then at the meeting, he says to them, these nobles, these officials, these people who are extorting and participating in usury, we're doing all we can to redeem our Jewish relatives who have had to sell them to pagan foreigners, but you're selling them back into slavery again. He says, we're trying to bring people out of the captivity over the last decades from Babylonia, but you're just selling them right back into slavery again. How often must we redeem our own people? And they had nothing to say in their defense. So he pressed further. What you're doing is not right. It's wrong. It's sinful. It's evil. Should you not walk in fear of our God in order to avoid being mocked by enemy nations? I myself, as well as my brothers and my workers, have been lending the people money and grain. But now let us stop this business of charging interest. You must restore their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and homes to them this very day and repay the interest you charged when you lent them money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. Now, the interesting thing here that Nehemiah does is at the very end of that last slide, he says, I myself, as well as my brothers and workers, have been lending the people money and grain, but now let us stop this business of charging interest. Nehemiah seems to indicate in this text that he was part of the problem, that he himself was charging interest against the law that God had given to them. And so I think that we have to give Nehemiah perhaps credit here, not for maybe doing the wrong thing, but for making a decision to do the right thing, and then to essentially call everybody out and say, we all, myself included, have been doing wrong, but now we're going to do here what is right. Whether or not Nehemiah's motivations were completely honest and forthright and forthcoming, again, who knows? But is anyone's motivations ever completely and utterly clean and clear and righteous? I don't think that is the point. The point is that Nehemiah does the right thing and calls everybody else to do the right thing as well. I love that we get this picture of Nehemiah here in the middle of the text, because foreshadowing, I'll tell you that Nehemiah slips back into a very, what I would say, unrighteous behavior that by the time we get to the end of the book, it's really going to just kind of unravel Nehemiah as a good guy in the story. And previous to this moment, we've kind of had the same situation with Nehemiah, where he's not been painted in such a great light in the decisions that he's making and the ways in which he's leveraging God and manipulating the people and their desire to follow God in order to do something, build the wall. That was not, as we've said, God's plan or God's desire for them, especially for the reasons that they were building it. But I'm glad that we see this good and righteous flash in the story of Nehemiah, because it's a reminder to me of something that I think is true of all of us, all humans, you, me, Nehemiah, everyone, that no person is ever fully good, and no human, no person is ever fully evil. Now, I know what I'm saying there. I'm rolling through my mind the list of people who I might think are fully evil. That'll give you an easy one that always kind of is said in these moments, Hitler. But there are also people who are in my sphere whom have acted in ways that are not just ungodly, but that are evil, and in which I've seen no shadow of good. And yet I would still with those people say they're not fully evil. I've seen flashes like here in Nehemiah in their own lives as well, where they've done the right thing or done a good thing, even though that may be a once a year occurrence. They're not fully evil. And then you've got on the other side people who, we might say are fully good. Classic example, maybe Mother Teresa. I'm sure that in your life there are people whom you see as being completely good and have never seen anything wrong or bad in them. But you go and read the journals and the memoirs of Mother Teresa, and you'll find, for as wonderful as she was not fully good. And neither are those people in your life as well. We're somewhere on the spectrum in between the poles of fully good and fully evil. We are complex creations, and we have to allow individuals to be complex creations. We try in our minds and in our hearts to categorize people as good or bad. He's a bad person. She's a good person. But the truth of the matter is that it's a lot more complex than that. And I'm grateful that we see that in Nehemiah, and that Nehemiah allows us to be reminded of this fact. So Nehemiah throws down the gauntlet and says what they will do. And to their credit, they respond as well in a positive way. We will give back everything and demand nothing more from the people. We will do as you say. Then Nehemiah says, I called the priests and made the nobles and the officials swear to do what they had promised. And so Nehemiah says, these are not going to be just empty words. You're going to commit. You're going to swear to it essentially in front of God and everybody. And then Nehemiah does something that is an image that we don't have something to translate it into in our own English experience several millennia after this was written. But he shakes out the folds of his robe and he says, if you fail to keep your promise, may God shake you like this from your homes and from your property. And so people in those days oftentimes would carry necessary things in the folds of the garments that they wore. And so it's a bit like a purse, or I guess in Nehemiah's case, a man purse, but would carry around necessary things. And so by shaking this out, Nehemiah is using a prophetic illustration that would have been used generally there in order to communicate, may I be divested of everything that I own and that I have, even the things that are hidden. And so Nehemiah essentially draws down upon them a swearing, an oath, that if they fail to do this, then a curse that God may shake them out of everything if they go back to the practices from before. You see, the reason for this is, and Nehemiah is not unwise here, he knows the danger that they're in if God decides to act as he has said he will act for people who live and extort in these ways. You see, the ultimate threat in the Old Testament was not God smoting people with lightning bolts. The ultimate threat in the Old Testament was the divine threat against those who harmed the poor. And so the danger to Nehemiah is if God decides to hold us accountable for what's going on here, essentially the wall project stops. We all go back into captivity if we're allowed to live at all, and we have to be disciplined. We have to pay retribution for the ways in which we've treated others. It's a good idea to not harm the poor. Why? Because it's the most serious thing that God cares about, not just in the Old Testament law, but if you track this dog all the way through the Bible and into the New Testament, Jesus, Paul, etc., the treatment of the poor, the marginalized, the refugee, the immigrant, the alien among you, the people who have no voice, who have no power, who have no resources. These are the people whom God doesn't just suggest we take care of, but commands that we defend, that we properly and appropriately resource, and lend our voice and power to. Nehemiah is just as relevant today as Nehemiah was then. Until tomorrow, happy reading.